Every single one of us, from the moment we draw breath, we begin leaving this monumental wake in the digital and physical world. It's sort of a fundamental human condition, right?
It absolutely is. We all leave traces behind. Names on documents, records in databases, memories etched into other people's minds. We are essentially defined by this relentless accumulation of our own history.
And it's not just the big stuff, like a birth certificate. It's everything. It's the coffee you bought this morning, the cell tower your phone just pinged.
Exactly. In the modern world, the very act of existing requires relentless documentation. You should think of your identity less as like a single file on a computer and more as this vast, decentralized cloud of metadata.
A cloud, that's a good way to put it.
Yeah, because your birth registration, that one document, it triggers healthcare records, educational files, financial footprints, governmental tracking. That data footprint, once you create it, is almost impossible to truly fully destroy.
But what if that monumental wake, that entire life history was removed? And I think this is the key part. What if that removal wasn't an accident? Not some system error or a fire in a records office, but a deliberate, sustained act of design.
A surgical excision.
Exactly. A surgical excision of the self from the, the bureaucratic body of the state.
And that is the core mystery we are diving into today. We've been immersed in a truly fascinating and frankly pretty unsettling stack of sources detailing a true anomaly. The man who intentionally erased his own history. He didn't just go off-grid. That's simple.
Right. Anyone can go off-grid.
He achieved statistical non-existence.
Okay, let's unpack this then. Our mission for this deep dive is to examine the process of this self-erasure. We're going to detail the exhaustive investigative findings of the authorities when they finally encountered him, and maybe more importantly, the profound, almost existential implications of what it means to actually achieve true invisibility in this hyper-documented age we all live in.
The story really starts with the initial encounter, which alone is the stuff of institutional nightmares. It instantly created what the investigators in these files, they quickly dubbed it a jurisdictional black hole.
A black hole, wow.
Because authorities detained a man who possessed literally no identification whatsoever.
And we really need to emphasize this. When we say no identification, this wasn't a case of a misplaced wallet or, a forgotten driver's license.
Not at all.
When they ran his details, and this is standard procedure, right? Name, date of birth, whatever he claimed, through their initial local databases, they just received nothing.
A null return. Which is unusual, but, it happens.
So they escalate, they go to regional checks.
Still nothing. Then national. The immediate difficulty this presented to them was the sheer institutional blank slate. When you detain someone, the very first thing the system demands is confirmation of identity. It's step one.
And in this case,
there was simply nothing to confirm. Step one was impossible.
Imagine the operational stress that would cause. You have a standard detainment, maybe for something incredibly minor like vagrancy or jaywalking, I don't know.
Right.
And it immediately escalates to a high-priority institutional emergency. Why? Simply because the basic premise of the modern security state, the idea that every single person is fundamentally identifiable, it failed instantly.
And it wasn't just a minor administrative hurdle for them. The files describe it as a deep structural failure. A failure to categorize, to log, and to process an individual. He became, instantly, this unknown variable in a system that is built entirely on known quantities.
It really does set the stage for a unique and, I imagine, a deeply frustrating investigation into non-existence. The whole thing pivots from asking who he is
to asking how he managed not to be.
So this moves us into the first major part of the investigation, the zero-footprint man and all the dead ends they hit.
Right, and when we talk about sophisticated evasion, our minds usually go to people using multiple fake IDs, a string of aliases, shell corporations, that kind of thing.
The Jason Bourne model.
Exactly. But this man achieved something far more radical. He achieved true statistical silence, a level of non-existence that should, mathematically speaking, be impossible for an adult living in the 21st century.
So the sources, they confirm this massive, exhaustive effort by the investigative team. And the fact that these efforts yielded, well, absolutely nothing.
We should probably talk about what exhaustive really means here. It's not just a few database searches.
Right.
Consider the modern investigative checklist. They didn't just check local DMV records. They would have run his information, or his lack of information, through every single national and international database available to them.
Across multiple domains, so not just law enforcement.
No, we're talking financial, medical, educational, military, intelligence, every silo of data the state has access to.
Let's break down that checklist failure. For you listening, what do we really mean when we say no records? We mean a systemic, total failure across the board.
They couldn't find a driver's license, no passport, no social security number or its equivalent, no tax file, not even a record of residency.
So not even a utility bill, a phone contract, a library card.
Nothing. Forget about a complex financial history. They couldn't even confirm his existence in a basic census file from 10 years ago. There was no paper trail, zero traceable medical history, and this is a big one, no educational records.
No high school diploma, no college application, nothing.
Nothing. Which is where the really counterintuitive nature of this case becomes so clear. For an adult male, especially one who appeared physically healthy and was clearly functionally intelligent, the complete absence of a footprint suggests a kind of operational mastery of evasion that is, like I said, statistically silent.
You have to think about the sheer infrastructure that tracks us every day.
All the time. We are cross-referenced by credit bureaus, we're logged by utility companies, linked through various health systems, tied to digital activity, whether we actively participate or not,
Right.
just by existing.
So to have absolutely no history, no links across any of those silos, it suggests, it's not just one smart decision he made.
No, it suggests a highly disciplined, probably decade-spanning program of self-scrubbing, a long-term project.
It raises so many practical questions. If he had financial resources, how could he possibly access them without a banking identity? If he moved internationally, how did he cross borders without a passport or a visa?
If he required medical care, how did he pay for it? Or receive it without insurance or some kind of state ID? Every normal function of life creates an inescapable trace.
And that's the point, isn't it? To achieve this level of erasure, it requires understanding the recursive nature of data tracking. It's not enough to just delete one file.
Not at all. If you delete a bank account file, let's say, the metadata relating to that account might still exist in 5 different backup servers, and in 3 credit reporting agency records, and 2 government oversight bodies. The scrub has to be synchronized, and it has to be recursive.
So the investigators, they understood this pretty quickly. This wasn't just a guy who disappeared. This implied an extremely sophisticated, sustained effort to scrub institutional memory across multiple global domains.
Only someone who truly understood the architecture of modern documentation, the way these systems talk to each other, could ever hope to achieve this.
And all of this, all these dead ends, it leads us to the most frustrating and critical one for the authorities: the failure of biometrics.
Yes.
The source documents, they're very explicit. They state that when they processed him, his fingerprints, they returned nothing.
And this is the moment. This is the moment the investigators move from thinking they had a difficult case to thinking they might have an impossible one.
Because fingerprints are the last resort.
They're designed to be the ultimate immutable fallback identifier. They are foundational to modern identity. Even if you somehow manage to avoid ID cards and Social Security registration and paying taxes, your fingerprints might be on file from half a dozen unexpected sources.
Like what?
Old military service, maybe a high school job that required a background check, mandatory immigration processing in some foreign country you visited once, or even a minor juvenile delinquency record from decades ago. These things stick around forever.
And crucially, these prints are indexed in international systems, right? Like Interpol. So they're not just searching one country's database.
They are querying a global network, a network designed for precisely this reason, to catch those trying to slip through the cracks. For the results to come back completely blank is not just unusual, it's a fundamental violation of the assumed stability of the entire system.
So what does that mean? What are the possibilities?
Well, the complete absence suggests several truly unsettling possibilities. Possibility 1. He was somehow born, raised, and lived his entire life, never once encountering an institution that required a fingerprint registration.
Which, for a functional adult who seems highly skilled, that seems pretty unlikely.
Highly. It would require growing up entirely outside of formal education, healthcare, military service, any form of documented employment. It would be a life lived perpetually off the grid, but somehow with the means to support a functioning, specialized existence. It's a contradiction.
Okay, so what's the second possibility?
The second one is far more complex and, frankly, terrifying for security services. It's the possibility that the records existed at one point, perhaps tied to a high-level government or security identity.
But they were expunged.
Expunged completely, systematically, and across multiple independently operated biometric databases.
That suggests a level of technical capability. I mean, who can do that?
That's usually reserved for state intelligence bodies, or maybe highly sophisticated proprietary corporate entities. To scrub a record from something like AFIS, the Automated Fingerprint Identification System, it isn't just hitting delete.
No, I can't imagine it would be.
You'd have to manipulate the indices, override the security logs, and ensure that the deletion cascade doesn't leave residual metadata that could still be queried later. It's a fundamental challenge to the entire concept of a permanent record.
So he either successfully evaded the entire institutional tracking system his whole life, which seems impossible, or he somehow possessed the master key to dismantle his own digital existence retroactively.
And both of those conclusions elevate this individual from just a petty mystery to a subject of intense national security interest. The authorities were completely stuck. They rely on these institutional markers, birth certificates, fingerprints, dental records, for confirmation of existence. The moment those markers failed, they lost their most basic investigative tool.
He was a physical person standing right in front of them with no corresponding informational shadow.
The complexity required to delete a biometric record, which is fundamentally supposed to be indelible and globally indexed, is immense. It signals to the investigators that this person isn't just unknown. He is intentionally unrecognizable.
So if they can't establish who he is, they can't establish where he came from or what he was doing. They're stuck at step zero. The investigation has to pivot dramatically.
Exactly. It pivots from identification to the far more complex task of understanding how such an erasure was even possible. And that takes them from the external world of records to the internal world of his mind.
They needed to find out if the man himself could provide any key to unlock his own past.
Right. And that's where the story gets even stranger.
Okay, so this second section is where the narrative shifts from a forensic investigation into, well, a profound paradox, the paradox of knowledge memory without self. Up until now, we've been talking about the external scrub, the data.
But the internal state of the man is what truly defines this anomaly. And it's what ultimately pointed investigators toward the idea that this was all by design. His vanishing act was a plan.
This is where it gets really interesting, you're right. It fundamentally challenges our basic understanding of memory and identity. Clinical assessments, they quickly determined the man wasn't suffering from generalized memory loss. This wasn't amnesia, not in the typical sense.
His mind was functionally perfectly intact. But it was. It was surgically scrubbed of the personal.
The sources detail this crucial distinction. It's almost a perfect psychological schism. I think we need to clearly define the two contrasting halves of his memory matrix that remained.
Okay, let's use an analogy to make it clear for everyone. Human memory, for these purposes, you can roughly split it into two categories. There's the memory of whatso, facts and skills, and the memory of your personal experience.
Right. So the first type, the memory of what psychologists call impersonal or functional knowledge.
Exactly. This is your semantic memory and your procedural memory. Semantic memory is like the Wikipedia in your brain. He remembered facts, historical dates, scientific concepts, the structure of languages. He had all the data.
And procedural memory.
That's the muscle memory and the skills. He retained fluency in multiple languages. And not just conversational fluency, we're talking complex, nuanced fluency. He had knowledge of intricate technical processes. He had the operational intellect of a highly trained specialist.
Okay, so that's one half, the functional half. But then you have the other side of the coin, the personal knowledge.
Also known as episodic memory. And this is like your personal photo album. It's the unique, subjective timeline of your life. And here the records show absolute zero, a complete blank.
He remembered nothing personal at all. No name, no birthplace.
No family, no history of relationships, no favorite foods, no moments of triumph or failure. The entire subjective tapestry of the self was just utterly defunct.
Wait, but I have to challenge that premise just a little. If his episodic memory was truly gone, wouldn't that imply a massive psychological void? Wouldn't that lead to distress or some kind of functional impairment? I mean, traditional amnesia is often incredibly destabilizing.
It is.
Yet, he was described as functional and highly intelligent. How do you reconcile the total loss of self with the total retention of function?
That's precisely the point. That's what signaled intentionality to the investigators. Traditional trauma-induced amnesia, it often results in a generalized degradation of memory. It frequently impacts procedural or semantic knowledge as well.
So someone who's had a terrible accident, they might forget how to drive or struggle with language.
Exactly. They might forget things they once knew how to do. This man retained the ability to function at an incredibly high level, to reason, to communicate, to solve complex problems. but he had zero personal attachment or context for any of it.
It's as if someone took a specialized computer and they deleted the entire user folder. All the pictures, the documents, the browser history, but they left the entire operating system, all the installed software, and the administrative protocols perfectly intact.
That is an excellent way to put it, and we should probably delve deeper into this functional knowledge, specifically the knowledge of systems that he retained. The sources highlight this as being a key clue. What does remembering systems imply in a practical sense?
It's so vague, but it implies a retained expertise in complex, typically closed frameworks. This isn't just, remembering how a car engine works. Depending on the depth of that knowledge, it could signify fluency in global logistical frameworks.
Or knowledge of high-level governance structures, familiarity with international financial infrastructure, or deep technical operation protocols for, say, secure government networks.
For example, knowing systems could mean he understands the legacy vulnerabilities in the SWIFT financial routing codes, or that he knows how different national security databases prioritize data entry, retention, and, crucially,
Deletion.
deletion. These are high-value, specialized skills, the kind of skills you only acquire through extensive, probably very expensive training.
In governmental, military, or elite corporate environments, places where that institutional knowledge is paramount and heavily guarded.
So this paints a picture of a highly intelligent person who had specialized training that was specifically preserved. He was still capable of functioning at a high level. He could converse about complex engineering problems or global politics.
And yet he remained an absolute ghost regarding his own origin.
The implication here is it's profound. This intentional separation suggests that the memory erasure wasn't a destructive accident, but a strategic, conscious effort. He kept the skills necessary for survival and adaptation, the high-value intellectual assets,
while deliberately destroying the vulnerable link of identity. Identity, in this kind of operational context, it becomes your Achilles heel. It's the easiest vector for authorities to trace and exploit.
And this combination, the perfect functional knowledge, coupled with the absolute lack of personal history, that is exactly what allowed investigators to move definitively past the simple diagnosis of amnesia.
They realized they weren't dealing with a medical mystery caused by an accident or a disease.
The conclusion became inescapable for them. The erasure was deliberate. It was a design choice.
And this shifts the entire narrative. They weren't dealing with a victim of circumstance anymore. They were dealing with the architect of his own radical self-annihilation.
That is such a powerful distinction, and it completely transformed their investigation. It means the focus shifted from trying to find the man's identity to trying to understand the methodology behind his radical self-creation as a non-entity.
The functional knowledge provided the necessary clue. The fact that he must have been highly trained and that training was likely what enabled the erasure in the first place.
If he retained knowledge of complex systems, the most logical assumption is that he anticipated needing those skills in his new life as an invisible person.
Exactly. This suggests the disappearance wasn't a retreat into silence or just dropping out. It was an operational necessity, a strategic reset designed to make him untraceable while retaining peak operational capability.
This leads us directly into the third section of our deep dive, the search for a claim, the theories, and ultimately the rebuttals.
Right, because once investigators determined the erasure was deliberate, sophisticated, and potentially internally managed, their attention logically turned outward. Even if this one individual executed the final act, who else would have the resources, the training, and the motivation to facilitate such a profound identity scrub?
The immediate logical theories that they pursued, they inevitably linked the sophisticated erasure to powerful state-level organizations. I mean, it makes sense. We're talking about capabilities that are usually reserved for organizations with deep global reach and basically unlimited resources.
The two primary theories were, 1, intelligence work, and 2, witness protection.
And they are logical fits. Let's look at the argument for intelligence work first. When you look at the resources you would need, the ability to clear national registries, to scrub biometric data, and potentially even perform the psychological training necessary to handle the elimination of personal history while retaining high-value skills, you are talking about capabilities usually reserved for the top tier of international espionage.
You have to think about the concept of a deep cover operative who has been burned or needs to be completely pulled from the field. An agency like the CIA or the GRU or Mossad, they have the administrative access, they have the psychological expertise, and they have the connections to global databases necessary to facilitate a total retroactive erasure. It's an extreme form of tradecraft, designed to prevent leakage or capture.
And then there's the witness protection argument, which at first seems similar.
It is, but with a different motivation. While standard witness protection focuses on relocation and issuing new identities, a case involving someone with extremely high-level threat exposure, let's say a former high-ranking state intelligence officer who's defecting, or someone who holds critical nuclear codes, that might necessitate not just a new name, but the wholesale physical and psychological removal of the former self.
Why go to that extreme?
To eliminate risk. The risk that a personal detail, a tick, or a shared memory could lead to their identification by hostile actors.
So the underlying premise for both theories and the reason investigators spent so much time on them is the same.
Exactly. Only state-level resources could achieve such a thorough erasure. They provide the institutional mechanism necessary for this level of record destruction and psychological conditioning. Investigators were essentially searching for a handler, a unit, or department that had placed this asset into a deep freeze and, maybe misplaced the location or the protocol for retrieval.
But I need to stop here and challenge the state theory. If a state agency was really involved, why would they go through the immense difficulty of destroying the man's history completely? Why not just execute a massive, thorough operation to create a completely fake history? With forged documentation, a believable background, new biometric markers. Isn't creating a fake history easier to manage than managing absolute non-existence?
That's an excellent point, and it's the exact friction that developed within the investigative team. The creation of a comprehensive fake history is easier to create, yes, but it is infinitely harder to maintain.
Guess so.
Every new identity is a vulnerability. It requires constant maintenance, and any small slip, a mismatched detail on a forged birth certificate versus a forged college transcript can unravel the whole thing. The goal of the zero-footprint man appears to be permanence.
So, absolute erasure.
It means there is nothing to maintain, there's nothing to slip up on because there is no identity to reference or verify. Non-existence is a perfectly sealed vacuum. There are no loose threads to pull.
Which makes the lack of an agency claim even more damning to those theories. And this brings us to the major twist in the sources. No agency claimed him.
This is perhaps the most significant piece of evidence in the whole case. It defined the true nature of what they were dealing with. Think about the operational procedures here. If the man was an intelligence asset or a high-value defector, the custodial agency would have three critical imperatives for a swift, silent intervention. And none of them occurred.
Okay, what are those three imperatives?
First, operational security. An operative with retained knowledge of sophisticated systems, whether they are intelligence gathering methods or sensitive infrastructure vulnerabilities, is an immediate high-priority security risk the moment he is compromised by a civilian detention. Every moment he remains detained, he risks exposing the methodology of his erasure, which would be a state secret of the highest order.
Okay, so they'd want to contain that information leak. What's number two?
Asset protection. These are high-value skills he has. The agency would have spent immense resources training him. They wouldn't simply abandon those skills to be interrogated or wasted in civilian custody. They would intervene immediately, even if it was very subtly, to reclaim their asset.
And the third one?
Diplomatic protocol and secrecy. If a foreign or domestic intelligence service were involved, they would have quiet channels. A back-channel phone call to a non-public number, a coded message, a non-public retrieval request routed through a high-level security liaison. They would never allow an operative of this caliber to remain uncategorized in a local detention center for long.
So the lack of any claim, subtle or overt.
It means the official institutional systems were genuinely unaware of his existence. No one was looking for him.
Therefore, the lack of a claim, it strongly supported the most unsettling possibility for the authorities, and I guess the most compelling one for us.
Yeah.
That this was the individual's choice.
And the implication of that is just massive. It means this level of self-erasure wasn't a program that was inflicted upon him by a higher power or a state entity. It was initiated, executed, and maintained by the individual himself. That makes him a complete statistical insecurity anomaly.
He was effectively a self-detonating identity bomb. If he wasn't claimed by an agency, it means he had executed a unilateral operation against his own existence, which forces us to consider the logistics of such a solo operation. How does one person access, modify, and delete records across multiple high-security databases and, at the same time, perform a psychological self-excision of personal memory?
It suggests that the knowledge of systems he retained wasn't just abstract intelligence. It was precisely the intimate, practical knowledge needed to dismantle his own bureaucratic identity from the inside out. He didn't just walk away from his old life. He systematically shredded the underlying code of his own existence using the very tools he was trained to use.
The profound conclusion that he chose to disappear, it flips the entire concept of disappearance on its head. It wasn't simple escape. For him, it was an operational achievement.
And it means he possessed an extraordinary level of discipline, technical skill, and sheer will to execute a sustained operational plan against his own self. He succeeded where state agencies usually require years and immense budgets. He weaponized non-existence.
Let's now transition into the final section, which is really the philosophical heart of this whole deep dive, the philosophy of invisibility. Why erase? Why go to this extreme?
Exactly. If the goal was just to live a quiet life, a decent forged identity would have certainly been enough. Or even a simple cash-only off-grid existence.
Right. The fact that he went to this impossible extreme, it suggests a goal far beyond mere privacy or a quiet retirement.
This is where we connect this fascinating case study to the bigger picture of what identity truly means in a society built entirely on documentation and verification. The sources, they articulate a really profound philosophical point. To erase identity is not just to delete data, it is to fundamentally remove recognition.
And recognition in this context is vital. It's so much more than just knowing a name. It is the sociological and the institutional validation of existence. It's the ability to interact with the foundational systems of modern life, the state, the financial system, the legal framework, and have those interactions acknowledged and logged. Without recognition, you don't exist in the eyes of the machine.
Recognition validates your legal existence through others and through records. If the bank doesn't recognize you, you cannot hold an account. If the state doesn't recognize you, you cannot vote, you can't hold a passport, or legally drive a car. Your identity is fundamentally tied to being recognized and cataloged by the systems that govern modern life. So the absence of identity is the systematic removal of the ability to be recognized by any authoritative source.
So the ultimate consequence of achieving this zero-record state is that, bureaucratically, his existence becomes invisible. He wasn't just physically hard to find, like, someone living in a remote cabin in the woods. He was bureaucratically non-existent, a ghost in the machine of the census.
And you should think about the practicalities of being truly invisible in a documented society. It requires an immense sacrifice. It means forfeiting virtually all the privileges of citizenship.
Like what? What are the big ones you lose?
No legal right to own property, no access to formalized health care beyond maybe emergency room cash payments, no ability to enter into legally binding contracts, and critically, no guaranteed protection under the law because the law cannot identify the party that needs to be protected. If you're a victim of a crime, the system has no official person to defend.
But the flip side of that massive forfeiture is what he gained.
Exactly. He gained complete anonymity and, critically, complete freedom from accountability. If you cannot be identified, you cannot be held responsible for past or future actions. The legal state cannot touch you because you are not legally there. You are unchargeable, untaxable, and completely untethered.
That is the radical bargain he struck. And it raises these profound questions about our own relationship with documentation. He traded all the privileges and protections of the state, the things you and I take for granted as guarantees of modern existence, for total sovereignty over his presence.
He became, for all intents and purposes, a human sovereign entity, unbound by documentation and all the limitations it imposes.
It really makes you wonder about the motivation. We are constantly leaving traces because we value recognition, protection, and convenience. This man represents the inverse goal, the ultimate philosophical rejection of the modern surveillance state. Was he viewing his past life, his relationships, his records, his name, not as assets, but as profound liabilities that tethered him to a life he desperately needed to escape?
If so, then the erasure wasn't an act of psychological breakdown. It was an act of radical self-liberation. He achieved a purity of anonymity that even the most extreme proponents of digital minimalism couldn't even dream of. He didn't just manage his data, he annihilated it.
So what was the practical legal outcome for the authorities who detain this unique philosophical problem? They have a man who is clearly functional, intelligent, non-aggressive, yet completely untraceable, unclaimed, and without any identifiable crime committed. What can they do?
The practical conclusion for them was unavoidable. And it demonstrates the limits of institutional power when it's faced with absolute non-identity. Since he couldn't be definitively identified, linked to any crime, or claimed by any agency, they had no legal basis under established statutes like habeas corpus to hold him indefinitely.
The institutional imperative is always to process and categorize.
Always. And when that categorization fails utterly, the system stalls. He doesn't know what to do.
He became administratively immune.
He was eventually released. The sheer vacuum of his non-existence became his ultimate legal defense. The system had to eject him because he lacked the necessary data inputs for standard intake, for processing, or for sustained containment. He was, in a legal sense, unprocessable. His deliberate, radical non-identity became his most powerful shield against the very state that sought to identify and categorize him.
And that brings us to the conclusion of this story, which is just this clean, terrifying narrative arc, from absolute mystery through intense forensic investigation to the realization of deliberate self-erasure and ultimately the victory of his design.
The man was released because the institutional mechanisms of identification failed to contain him. But the final, definitive statement on his success, it lies in his final act.
He didn't just walk out the front door and begin a quiet life in a new neighborhood. The records indicate he was released and he vanished again.
He completed his mission of invisibility. He
Okay.
confirmed the sustainability of his radical choice.
And that second vanishing is so much more significant.
Oh, absolutely. The first time he vanished, that was his life's work. It culminated in the slow, meticulous act of erasing his records and his psychological past. But the second vanishing, occurring immediately after being detained, thoroughly investigated, and scanned by every major authority and database available, that's far more significant.
It confirms that the detention was just a temporary inconvenience. It wasn't a failure of his system.
He proved that his zero-footprint state was sustainable, even under the maximum scrutiny of the world's most powerful security apparatuses. It was captured by the net, analyzed, and yet he slipped right through the very mesh that was designed to hold him.
And that leads to the final provocative thought for you, the listener, something that builds directly on the material we've covered. Remember that critical retention. The man remembered systems.
His second vanishing, achieved after being detained and interrogated, suggests he used his retained functional knowledge, that deep, specialized expertise in infrastructure and security protocols, to evade modern tracing methods immediately upon his release.
So he wasn't relying on luck or just happenstance. He was relying on a retained operational capacity to exploit a temporary blind spot in the very system that had just held him.
So the question for you to think about is this. What trace, if any, did he have to exploit to ensure his final, total disappearance? Did he observe flaws in the investigative process while he was detained? Did he leverage a known vulnerability in the system that held him? Perhaps a data lag between agencies, a jurisdictional overlap, or a procedural loophole that allowed him to disappear with absolute certainty because he knew exactly where the system would look next?
The contrast between his first detention, which was due to a simple lack of ID, and the second successful vanishing, it suggests the detention itself may have been a final, crucial data-gathering experience for him. It may have allowed him to perfect his escape methodology.
The man who erased his own history wasn't trying to hide. He was trying to optimize for non-existence.
And he won.
Stay curious at Twilight and ask yourself what traces you're willing to leave behind and who benefits from their existence.